"Will you stay if I undress?" the Chinese woman asked after the lone rancher saved her from drowning. The solitude of the Wyoming high country was a balm Ronan Croft applied to wounds he could not name. It was 1874 and the war was nearly a decade gone, but its ghost still walked with him in the thin, cold air. His cabin, a squat structure of hewn logs chinked with mud and moss, stood a stone's throw from the Wind River, its back pressed against a stand of unyielding pines. He had built it himself, built it to be a fortress against memory, against the world of men that had failed him. He was a tall man, made lean by hard work and lean living. His face, weathered by sun and wind, was a map of past hardships, with lines etched around eyes the color of a stormy sky. His hands were calloused and capable, as comfortable with an axe as they had once been with a rifle. He was an ex-sergeant of the Union Army, a man who had seen the fields of Gettysburg turn to red mud. Now he was a lone rancher with a small spread carved out of the wilderness. He kept to himself, a bargain that suited both him and the folks in the nearby town of Lander. Lander was a raw, burgeoning settlement he avoided. The folks there looked at him and saw a man who had fought for the North, a Yankee presence in a territory where sympathies had often been divided. They saw a man who did not speak of his past, who did not drink in their saloons or pray in their churches, and they mistrusted his silence. For his part, Ronan saw in their faces the same blind certainty that had sent Boys, his own brother among them, into the meat grinder of war. The quiet resentment from the locals was a dull ache, but the thunder of cannon that still echoed in his quietest moments was a sharp, unhealing pain. That spring had been a bitter one. A late snow in May had blanketed the high peaks, and now under the relentless sun of early June, it was letting go. The melt came fast and furious. The Wind River, usually a clear, quick-running ribbon of blue, had transformed into a churning brown beast. It chewed at its banks, its roar a constant, menacing presence. He was checking his horse's shoes near the corral, the rhythmic rasp of the file a familiar comfort, when he heard it. A sound that did not belong. Not the cry of a hawk, or the scream of a catamount. It was human. A thin, desperate shriek, swallowed almost immediately by the river's growl. Ronan froze, head cocked. He thought he had imagined it, another phantom from a past filled with cries. Then it came again, fainter, but unmistakable. A woman's voice, sharp with terror. His body moved before his mind had fully consented. He dropped the file and ran toward the river bank. He scanned the torrent, his eyes snagging on the chaos of broken branches. And then he saw her, a flash of dark fabric and pale skin, tangled in the branches of a fallen cottonwood that was being battered by the water. She was caught, a fragile anchor in a world of violent motion. He did not hesitate. There was no time for thought, only the cold, hard instinct of a man who had pulled comrades from fields of fire. He kicked off his heavy boots, stripped off his gun belt, and plunged into the icy water. The shock of the cold was a physical blow. The current was a living thing that grabbed at his legs. He fought it, his arms churning, his eyes locked on the woman. He was a strong swimmer, but this was a brawl. As he got closer, he could see her more clearly. Her head was barely above the surface, her face a pale oval against her dark, plastered-down hair. One arm was hooked desperately around a thick branch. She appeared to be caught on something beneath the water as well, her eyes closed, her face slack with near unconsciousness. He reached the cottonwood, gasping. "Hold on," he yelled. He grabbed a sturdy limb, anchoring himself. He had to work quickly, reaching for her, his fingers closing around her thin, cold arm. Her dark tunic was torn at the shoulder. A small embroidered silk pouch was still tethered to her wrist by its strap, a strange, desperate attachment in the face of death. He saw that her leg was wedged between two branches below the waterline. He took a deep breath, submerged himself, and worked blindly with his hands. His lungs burned. Finally, with a great heave, he freed her. He resurfaced, dragging her limp form with him, and began the brutal fight back to shore. He half-dragged, half-carried her out of the water and collapsed on the muddy bank, his chest heaving. He rolled her onto her side and pressed his fingers to her neck. He felt a pulse, faint and thready, but there. She coughed, a racking sound, and a stream of river water trickled from her mouth. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing dark, expressive eyes, cloudy with confusion and pain. They fixed on him, wide with a primal fear. "Easy now," he said, his voice rough. "You're safe." She struggled to sit up, her body trembling violently. She clutched the torn fabric to her chest. Where am I?" she whispered, her teeth chattering. "My land." Near the Wind River he rose to his feet, a chill seeping deep into his bones. "You need to get warm." "My cabin is close." He reached a hand down to help her. She flinched away, scrambling backward in the mud. "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Do not take me to town, please." Her plea was so raw, so filled with a dread that seemed to eclipse even her near drowning, that it stopped him cold. "I'm not taking you to town," he said gruffly. "But you'll die of cold out here. The cabin is your only choice." She watched him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face, weighing one danger against another. Finally, with a barely perceptible nod, she relented. She tried to stand, but her legs gave way. Without a word, Ronan scooped her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, a bird-bone fragility that felt alien. She went stiff at his touch but did not fight him. As he carried her toward the column of smoke rising from his chimney, he could feel the tremors that racked her body and the dead, heavy weight of the waterlogged pouch still dangling from her wrist. He pushed the cabin door open and carried her inside. The small, one-room space was spare and orderly. A stone fireplace, a narrow cot, a rough-sawn table, and shelves holding tins of food. It was the scent of the place, wood smoke, coffee, and solitude, that seemed to unnerve her most. She was an intrusion, and they both knew it. He set her down gently in the chair closest to the hearth. "Get those wet things off," he ordered, his back already turned as he added wood to the fire. He did not look at her, giving her what little privacy the small room allowed. The silence was thick, broken only by the crackle of the flames and her chattering teeth. He poured 2 cups of coffee, lacing them with whiskey, and set one on the floor beside her chair before retreating to the far side of the room. He finally allowed himself to look. She was huddled in his spare blanket, her wet tunic and trousers draped over the other chair. Her dark hair was a tangled mess, and a dark bruise was already purpling on her cheek. "My name is Ronan Croft," he said, breaking the silence. She looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. She whispered. They sat that way for a long time. He watched the way she flinched when a log popped in the fire. She was a woman wound tight with secrets. "You ought to eat," he said, his voice softer than he intended. She shook her head. As dusk settled, an awkward tension fell between them. There was only one cot. "You take the bed," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll sleep by the fire." He laid out his bedroll on the rough plank floor, keeping his back to her. He was acutely aware of her every movement. He stared into the dying embers, willing sleep to come, but his mind was alive, agitated by her presence. He heard her move behind him, the soft pad of her bare feet on the floor. "Mr. Croft," her voice was a trembling whisper. He did not move. "What is it?" There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was stripped of all its earlier defenses, leaving only a raw, desperate vulnerability. "Do you want to look at me?" The question hit him like a stray bullet. He remained frozen, his back to her. She took his silence for what it was not. "Will you stay if I undress?" she whispered. In those words, he heard the echo of 100 transactions he could only imagine. He heard the shame, the resignation, the awful, hollow bartering of a woman with nothing left to sell but herself. A woman who had learned that a man's help always came with a price. A hot, unfamiliar shame washed over him, mingled with a surge of anger, at her, at the men who had driven her to this, at a world that could break a person down to such a point. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his body fully away from her, presenting her with nothing but his rigid back. He stared hard into the glowing coals, his jaw clenched. "Get some sleep, he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. "No one is going to bother you here." He did not hear her move for a long time. When she finally did, it was the quiet sound of the cot ropes creaking under her weight, followed by a soft, choked sob that she tried and failed to stifle in the darkness. Ronan Croft lay on the hard floor, listening to the sound of her weeping and the unabated roar of the river, feeling the first crack spread across the frozen walls he had built around his heart. The night's raw confession hung between them long after the fire had died. When dawn broke, he was already up, the coffee pot simmering. Mai did not rise until the sun was fully in the sky. She moved with a stiff, pained grace, the shame of the previous night a cloak she wore. "The river is still too high," Ronan stated, staring out the open door. It was a fact as unchangeable as the granite peaks that loomed over them. The days that followed fell into a strange, unspoken rhythm. The swollen river trapped them in a world no bigger than Ronan's small plot of land. Mai was not a woman who could abide idleness. He found her in his small vegetable patch, painstakingly pulling weeds. "You don't have to do that," he said. She looked up, shielding her eyes. "I am earning my keep." Ronan did not argue. He understood the dignity in work. Yet his awareness of her was a constant thrum beneath the surface of his thoughts. He would find himself watching her from a distance. One afternoon, as she reached up to hang a mended shirt of his on a line, the dark tunic she wore shifted against the skin of her back. He saw them, faint, silvery lines. Scars, old ones. He looked away quickly, a cold anger coiling in his gut. They were not the scars of an accident. She, in turn, seemed to study him in stolen glances, learning the contours of his silence. They were two solitary animals circling one another in a cage forged by the floodwaters, wary and wounded. The outside world intruded on the fourth day in the form of Ben, a younger hand from a neighboring ranch. Ronan saw him coming and felt a familiar tightening in his gut. Mai saw him, too, and a flicker of panic crossed her face. "Walker figured I'd check if the river carried you off to Nebraska," Ben called out, swinging down from his horse. His eyes widened as he caught sight of Mai standing hesitantly in the cabin doorway. He swept his hat off. "Ben," Ronan said, his tone discouraging conversation. "What do you need?" Ben's gaze flickered between them, his curiosity palpable. "Town's all a buzz." Tell about her." He nodded subtly toward Mai. She flinched as if struck and melted back into the shadows of the cabin. Ronan's eyes narrowed. "What about her?" "That Chinese woman," Ben said, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "The one who was with Jacob Reed, the prospector who died last month. His partner, a fellow named Gable, is in town raising hell. Says Reed had a stash of gold dust and that she ran off with it the night he died. Gable is saying all sorts of ugly things, stirring up the boys Reed owed money to. The sheriff is listening, too." Ronan's face was stone. "Folks should mind their own business. Well, you know how it is," Ben said with a shrug. "Anyway, the marshal put a notice on Reed's claim. Belongs to his creditors now." He finally seemed to notice the thunderous look on Ronan's face and took a step back. "Well, I best be on my way." He rode off, leaving a thick, poisoned silence. Ronan turned and went back inside. Mai was standing by the cold hearth, her face pale and pinched. "He was right," she said, her voice a dead monotone. "What the man said." Ronan leaned against the door frame, waiting. "Jacob did die," she confessed to the floorboards. "And Gable, he is not a good man. He came to the lean-to the morning after Jacob was buried. He said I had until nightfall to be gone, or he'd take what he was owed from my hide." She finally looked at him, her eyes shimmering. "There was no gold dust. Not like he thinks. Just a little I had saved. He knew about it. My horse panicked in the river when I tried to cross. She threw me, so that was it. A fugitive accused of theft, with no rights a man like Gable or the law was bound to respect." He felt a reluctant stirring of pity, an emotion he had tried to cauterize long ago. The confession seemed to hang between them, a bridge of shared ruin, and Ronan found himself walking across it. "Promises," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They're just words, easily broken." He walked to the window, looking out at the unforgiving mountains. "I was 19 when I went to war. Left a younger brother back home. Samuel. I promised I'd be back in a year. Told him to stay, look after our folks. He paused, the memories thickening his throat. The war was for years. When it was finally over, I went back. Samuel hadn't listened. Enlisted a year after me. Died of dysentery in a camp in Virginia without ever seeing a real battle. He turned from the window, his stormy eyes meeting mine. I came back from the dead to find my brother in the ground and my future in another man's house. I never believed in another promise again. The silence that followed was different. It was filled with the weight of two broken pasts. For the first time, I looked at him not as a savior or a threat, but as a man who understood the language of grief. That night, a chill wind swept down from the peaks. Mai seemed to have caught a chill of her own, and by nightfall she was shivering uncontrollably, her skin hot to the touch. The fever climbed. She grew restless, tossing in the narrow cot, muttering in a fluid, tonal language he did not understand. He spent the night by her side, bathing her forehead with cool river water. In the deep hours before dawn, she grew still. Her eyes fluttered open, lucid for a moment. She looked at his calloused hand on her forehead and then up at his face. Her own hand, small and hot, came up and clutched his. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "You are the only one," she murmured, her voice thick with fever. "The only one who's touched me without wanting something." The words, spoken from the unguarded depths of her mind, struck him with the force of a physical blow. He saw again the faint silver scars on her back, heard the echo of her whispered offer on that first night. In her world, he realized with a sickening clarity, an act of simple decency was a profound anomaly. She slipped back into a restless sleep, but her words remained, burning behind his eyes, changing everything. The fever broke with the dawn. The river's roar had subsided to a dull murmur. The flood was finally receding. She would be able to leave soon. The thought, which should have been a relief, left a strange, hollow ache in his chest. A soft sound behind him made him turn. It was Mai, standing a few feet away, wearing his old, faded army shirt. It swallowed her small frame, falling to her mid-thigh. In the soft morning light, with the wildness of the landscape behind her, she looked like a wood sprite, a creature untethered from the harsh world that had so wounded her. "The river is going down," he said. She nodded. "I know." She took a small step closer. "Ronan?" she asked, using his first name for the first time. Her voice was quiet, almost carried away by the river's murmur. "Can I stay a little longer?" The question hung between them. It was not about the river. It was about him. The part of him that had cultivated solitude for a decade screamed to say no. But the man who had spent a night tending her fever, the man who had heard her whisper of a world where every touch had a price, could not form the word. He gave a short, jerky nod. "The crossing will be treacherous for a few more days," he said, his voice rough. It was an excuse, and they both knew it. "You can work for your keep. I won't have charity in my house." The small, tremulous smile touched Mai's lips. "Thank you, Ronan," and so a new season began. The river receded, but Mai stayed. She fell into the rhythm of his life, filling spaces he had not realized were empty. Their companionship was a thing of quiet spaces and shared tasks. Words were sparse, but a language grew between them in shared glances, in small, unspoken kindnesses. For the first time since the war, Ronan felt the sharp edges of his solitude begin to soften. But with this comfort came a tension, a fine, high-strung wire pulled taut between them. Each accidental touch was a spark that lit a fire deep in his gut, a slow-burning heat that both warmed and shamed him. He was a man long unused to the presence of a woman, and his body reacted with a simple, animal hunger that his mind condemned. She was a guest, a survivor he had sworn to protect. She was not for him to want. One rainy afternoon, he came inside to find her sitting on the floor by the small wooden chest at the foot of his cot. In her lap was a bundle of letters tied with a fraying piece of twine, his letters from the war. "I am sorry," she said, looking up. "I should not have." He did not get angry. "It doesn't matter." She picked up one of his own letters. Would you read one to me?" she asked. The request was so intimate, so unexpected, it disarmed him. He took the letter, his fingers clumsy, and sat in the chair opposite her. His voice was hoarse as he began to read words written by a 20-year-old boy. He read about the mud, the cold, the longing for a warm bed. Then his voice faltered. I worry for Samuel. His last letter sounded too bold. There is no glory here, mother, only noise and fear. Tell him to stay. He stopped, unable to go on. Mai did not speak. She simply reached out and laid her hand on his arm. It was not a touch of pity, but of understanding. In that simple gesture, another layer of the wall around his heart crumbled to dust. A week later, he watched her ride his horse, Drum, across the flat land by the river. She looked younger, freer than he had ever seen her. An hour later, a sudden, terrified whinny echoed from downriver. Ronan dropped his axe and ran. He found them in a shallow ravine where the edge had given way. Mai was pushing herself up, her face white with shock. Mai, he yelled, his voice raw with a fear that shocked him with its intensity. He reached her in 2 strides, his hands grabbing her shoulders. Are you hurt? No, I think I am all right, she stammered. I'm so sorry, Ronan. He did not hear her. All he could feel was the overwhelming, terrifying relief that she was safe. Without thinking, he pulled her against him, crushing her to his chest, burying his face in her dusty hair. She sagged against him, her own arms wrapping around his waist. He could feel every line of her body, the frantic pulse in her neck against his cheek. Slowly, he loosened his grip, his hands moving to cup her face. His gaze dropped to her mouth. The world narrowed. He leaned in, his own breath catching. He was going to kiss her, but then he saw the look in her eyes. Beneath the shock, he saw a flicker of dutiful surrender. He saw the woman who felt she owed him a debt. He could not do it. He stopped, his lips hovering an inch from hers, then pulled back, the movement sharp and decisive. The moment was broken. The wire between them snapped. That night, the silence in the cabin was a suffocating blanket. Finally, she stood up and walked to the center of the room. Look at me, Ronan, she said, her voice quiet but firm. You saved me, again and again. But you never let me thank you. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for the ties of the old army shirt she wore. Will you stay this time? She asked, her voice a low, trembling challenge. She shrugged the shirt from her shoulders, letting it fall. She stood before him in her thin chemise, her skin glowing, her faint scars like silver etchings on her back. It was not an offer of payment. It was a plea to be seen, to be wanted for who she was, not for what she owed. He stood, closing the space between them. He reached out, his calloused hands cupping her face. I want you, Mai, he said, his voice a raw, broken whisper. But not because you feel you owe me. A single tear escaped her eye, then another. She did not make a sound, but her shoulders began to shake with silent, racking sobs. The shame, the cruelty, the losses, it all came pouring out. She wept for the men who had taken without asking, for the kindness she did not know how to accept. That doesn't make you less, he told her, his voice filled with a conviction as solid as the mountains. That makes you braver than most men I have known. He pulled her gently against him, holding her as she cried. And when her sobs finally quieted, he tilted her face up to his. The kiss, when it came, was not a thing of fire, but as soft and hesitant as the dawn. It was a kiss of profound and aching tenderness, a silent conversation between 2 scarred souls. It spoke of shared pain and a dawning, fragile hope. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. Mai, he whispered, the name a prayer. She did not answer with words. She simply took his hand and led him to the cot. She lay down and patted the space beside her. He lay down next to her and she curled into his side, laying her head upon his chest, right over the steady, heavy beat of his heart. His arm came around her instinctively. This was not about desire. It was about sanctuary. For the first time since he had pulled her from the river, Mai slept a sleep of true and utter peace, safe in the arms of the man who had seen her brokenness and called her brave.